Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Greek fire. Greek fire is essentially the primitive form of napalm, and it was first created in Greece, you guessed it. It was used often and efficiently for naval battles during the Byzantine Empire. It was used and worked well for these battles because it was able to not only float on top of the water, but it also was difficult to put out the fire using water. The secrets regarding this substance were guarded so greatly because it was such a powerful weapon at the time. The information on what it was made out of, how it was stored, or how it functioned remain a mystery to this day. The formula to recreate it has been tried many times, but it is currently thought that the particular storage and some sort of pressurized delivery system are what played such a huge role in its functionality and ignition, and we have yet to figure out those secrets. In our number 9 spot today we have Roman cement. Concrete is the most commonly used building material in the world, but our current cement, water, sand, rocks mixture is nothing compared to the original stuff. While our modern concrete was created in the 1700s, there was obviously stuff that was being used before. In fact, concrete was used quite a bit during antiquity by Egyptians, Assyrians, and Romans. The Romans seemingly used to generate the most, and they are the ones who really perfected the recipe that we just can't seem to replicate now. Apparently, the ancient mixture involved burnt limestone as well as crushed rocks and water, but whatever the heck it was, their structures were a lot more withstanding than ours are now, which has led people to question, how do we get that level of hardiness back in our modern day concrete? In our number 8 spot today we have the Antikythera mechanism. The Antikythera mechanism is an extremely mysterious discovery that has stumped researchers ever since it was found. This artifact was found 150 feet below the surface of the Aegean Sea in a shipwreck, and it is the oldest kind of computer ever recorded, as it was dated back to the 7th century BC. The author David Childress likened the finding to if they found a jet plane in King Tut's tomb. That's how bizarre this discovery really was. Due to the complexity and oddity of the finding, alien enthusiasts have believed for quite some time that it may have been technology that was passed down from some sort of superior being. This analog computer may have had a ton of uses, and researchers aren't 100% sure about all of the ways it was used, but it is known to have been some sort of astronomical calculator. It was able to predict eclipses and different planetary placements. The mechanism was able to calculate the position and running time of each planet. How would they have been able to create this without the use of sophisticated astronomical tools? We have been able to recreate this mechanism to see how it functions, but no one is able to tell how it could have possibly been created.
Number 7. Back to the Future. During the technological boom of electronics in the 1980s, there was one invention I think is really unusual. Computers, camcorders, and even home video game consoles were becoming commonplace all over the world. People who are familiar with retro Nintendo consoles are familiar with the likes of Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, or Contra. You may even remember a certain gaming accessory involving a laughing dog every time you miss a duck. What 80s kids might not remember is the Konami Laser Scope. Similar to Nintendo's Zapper, but with 2 key differences. 1, it's a headset instead of a pistol. 2, it's voice controlled, meaning when you come across enemies in game, you have to shout fire to fire in game. The Konami Laser Scope was bold and tried to be ahead of its time, but when taking a good look at it, 1, it makes the user just look ridiculous, and 2, it doesn't work. Reviews for the headset are not favorable and just defeat the purpose of using a headset. Today we have VR headsets that may seem just as ridiculous, but they work, and the use of voice still isn't a primary control used in games today.
In our number 6 spot today we have Damascus steel. It's possible that you may have heard of Damascus steel before, and that is because the name still exists, and it's used in reference to a variety of pattern welded forged steel products, but the modern day stuff just really isn't what it used to be. Historically, Damascus steel was discovered quite a long time ago, and it was used to make swords in the Middle East. It is said that these swords had the ability to cut through rocks or even completely cut through other swords, which is just absolutely insane. The exact process of how these swords were made has been lost to time, but it is rumored that Wootz steel was imported from Sri Lanka and used in the creation process along with other metals. Somehow the metals were basically weaved together rather than an alloy being created. This is what led to the steel not only being exceptionally strong but also really flexible, and it is this process that modern day smiths can't seem to exactly replicate. The modern day Damascus products are definitely high quality, gorgeous products, but it seems as though the secrets of the past may hold something even better.
Number 5. Flutes. We love a solid flutist. They're flutists, right? Flutist? Dude, I've always wanted to play the flute. Pied Piper, that guy is daring, that guy's wild. He runs around town and plays the jazz flute all day long in tights. Of course I want to be like that. Mostly, he's got some flaws. But who was the first person to bust out We Three Kings? Who do we have to blame for all those horrible recorder classes in elementary school? Always the one kid next to you, you're like, drain the spit, it's not on properly. Use that pinky, cover your thing up. The first instrument known to man was most likely our vocal cords, but the second instrument were the flutes of Glycine Coastal Cave. They're the oldest musical instruments that have ever been discovered. They were made from bird bone and the ivory of a mammoth. Yeah, so that's an indication how old they are. They made music out of mammoth ivory. That's old. Brass? Like, no, we haven't found that yet.
In our number 4 spot today, we have Ulfbert. This mysterious sword has been confusing ever since it was discovered by archaeologists. Experts were able to date this sword back to the Viking era sometime from 800 to 1000 AD, but no one could figure out how this sword was made, especially with what technologies were available at the time. It seemed as though this sword was made using techniques that didn't exist until 800 years later when the Industrial Revolution happened, so how could it have been made all of that time before? It is said that everything about this sword, from the composition of the metal to the extreme heat needed to forge the blade, it just couldn't have been done at the time, but clearly it was. So how? A blacksmith who tried to recreate the sword only using methods that would have been used at the time explained that he was unable to make it without resorting to more modern technology.
Number 3. Wilson! Some of you may have been cool enough back in 1975 to own a pet rock. Some of you may have not. Looking back, it doesn't really make any sense. Sure, everyone needs something to keep them company. Tom Hanks would have never gotten off the island he was stranded on if it wasn't for Wilson. Imagine a world without Tom Hanks. I, for one, would not want to live in such a world. All jokes aside, the pet rock was a genius marketing campaign, very similar to the fidget spinner of recent years. It's proof that if you can get a fad trade rolling, you can sell anything. Now who wants some of my bathwater?
In our number 2 spot today, we have Stradivari violins. If you're a string instrument enthusiast, then you definitely have heard of the Stradivari family and the instruments created by them. These instruments were created between 1650 and 1750, and they were highly sought after in their day, and even more so now. Apparently, these instruments feature an unparalleled sound quality that has been found to be impossible to recreate. The instruments that have survived through to the modern day are now worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, so it is abundantly clear that these instruments are incredibly valuable. Here's the catch though, experts can't agree or figure out what exactly it is that makes them sound so wonderful. Some have speculated that the magnificent sound comes from a fungus that grew in the region, some think that it's the density of the wood, but regardless, no one really knows for sure. At the end of the day, the secrets of the family art were laid to rest with the Stradivari family. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Library of Alexandria. This isn't necessarily technology as we now think of the word, but this certainly was one of the greatest losses we've seen. This library is said to have held a collection of over 1 million scrolls, which are said to have been all the written works in the world at the time. The library was founded in 300 BC, and it was where the scholars of the time would come to study. When a person visited the library, they needed to give over any books that they had so that they could be copied and added to the collection of the library. It isn't exactly clear what it was that destroyed the library, but rumors range from Julius Caesar accidentally setting it on fire to an invasion that set it ablaze. At the end of the day, the building burned and everything in it was destroyed. What was in that building was absolutely priceless, and we can only guess at what kind of secrets it held. Unfortunately, many of what was in the library wasn't written anywhere else, so it's destined to stay a mystery.
Number 10. Extinction. Neanderthal history dates back to around 430,000 years ago. We've always thought that their extinction was caused by some sort of event, some catastrophic wipeout of some sorts, you name it, and we're trying to pinpoint it every day. Not every day, but you get it. There's a new Netflix documentary called Ancient Apocalypse where Graham Hancock explains this very event. What wiped out early humans, and rather, what's left of them? Very recently, a human tooth was discovered in a cave in southern France. Now, this tooth in question is from 54,000 years ago. Now, up until this point, we always thought Neanderthals went extinct around 40,000 years ago, when modern humans humans started to roll in. But this new discovery could mean that the two species may have coexisted at the same time. Imagine that, you're going to work, you see a Neanderthal, you're like, hey, what's up? This is an odd 10,000 years, cool. Did modern humans wipe out Neanderthals? Maybe, I mean probably. Are Homo sapiens to blame for the extinction of Neanderthals? That would be crazy, imagine that. Meanwhile, I'm over here like, hey, hit that thumbs up button, cheers. Species are wiping out each other, this is crazy. Number 9, craftsmen. It doesn't matter how far back you go, art will always be around in some way, shape, or form. Literally, Neanderthal craftsmen would carry with them a pouch, and it would basically be a vandalism pouch. They could just go around and draw anything they wanted. And inside of it, it includes lithic flakes, sharp rock flakes basically to cut anything at any time. You had with them scrapers as well, which would be used to cut animal meat or carve wood. Pressure tools were also in there as well to sharpen said other tools. Just the first ever tool belt, essentially. Now, Neanderthals would use hard rock knapping and use striking techniques, and sometimes they would carve art. Neanderthal carvings were discovered in Unicorn Cave over in Germany recently. Archaeologists found 50,000-year-old deer bone with patterns carved into it with said tools. So either these guys were bored or they were expressing themselves via art. Number 8. Food supply. Hunting looks challenging today, let alone thousands of years ago. I'm sure a crossbow helps, but back then, not so easy. Neanderthals would of course have to hunt in order to eat and survive, but just what did they eat? Hardin Tartar hinted at their diet, and that diet being mussels, dolphin, seal, and tons of plants. Now this came to light after part of a seal's jaw was discovered in a Vanguard cave in Gibraltar. Now the jaw in question had man-made cut marks from tools that I mentioned earlier. So now we have a full picture. Now we can put a date on it. Number 7. Math. One of the earliest uses of the number 0 being in mathematics came from the Mayans. Thanks, awesome. They were super advanced in their mathematics, I would say for their time, but no, in general they were advanced. We're still trying to understand how they achieved what they did without calculators. It's impressive. They drew complex hieroglyphs on long strips of paper made from fig tree bark. They didn't have much to work with here, yet somehow it was still enough. The Mayan numerical system only had 3 symbols. This was long before Bedmaz was born. They had 0, 1, and 5. That's it. You could literally count on one hand. There was a shell shape, a dab, and a bar. These numbers went from 0 to 19, and then they would count groups of 20. By time 36 BC rolled around, the Maya were introducing the concept of 0 into their numbering system. Thanks guys, I failed math twice because of those zeros. Cheers. Number 6. Spears and arrows. Perhaps one of the most vital inventions, and one that we for sure still use today, is that of arrows and spears. They were a necessity of course back then when it came to hunting, and for people in the Stone Age, well, all they needed was wood, really. They would carve a leaf shape or a triangle at the tip, our modern day arrow, and they were used mainly by raiders or barefoot hunters. But when it came to hunting, you didn't want to get too close to your prey, right? Or else the wrong team would be claiming victory and then eating the other for lunch. So their solution was to throw these spears, or make really tiny ones. One of two. You can either javelin somebody really hard or hang back and, just shoot a big dude with an arrow. One of the two. It's gonna be a lose-lose probably. The oldest bows in history are from 9000 BC. Can you believe that? And they're home guard bows. And they're found in Northern Europe all the way from the Mesolithic period. The oldest spears, however, they come from Germany around 400,000 years ago. They're actually the oldest wooden artifacts in history. Imagine being the first person to make a spear. Forget iPhones. A spear? Buddy, you're a genius.
Number 5. Hello there. Channeling our inner General Grievous, our number 5 spot belongs to the monowheel. Originally designed in the 19th century, it wasn't until the 20th century they slapped a motor on one of these bad boys and did their best escape attempt from Utapau. Sorry, I'm a Star Wars guy. It just looks like the vehicle from the 3rd movie, I can't help myself. In reality, the monocycle is a single-wheeled motorized vehicle where the driver either sits inside the wheel housing or right beside it. Today these vehicles are still around but really only used for entertainment purposes, as the design does have a few issues. One wheel gives balance issues, there's a visibility issue since, well, you're usually sitting inside the wheel, and an issue called gerbling, which basically means if the driver brakes too hard, the inner ring will overcome its own gravity and the driver will do a full loop, similar to how a gerbil spins around on its wheel. Seeing that would make Monday morning traffic a lot more amusing though, I gotta say.
Number 4. Forbidden Friends. Lascaux cave paintings date back to some 17,000 years ago, and a lot of the art seen on the walls of the cave art that depicts animals. It's mostly pretty much all animals. It's beautiful. About 900 of them, with just over 600 being recently identifiable. There are cattle, bison, some wild cats, bears, birds, you name it, but there are no reindeer. At all. What happened, right? Did they just forget about this one specific animal out of 900, although they ate reindeer meat almost every day? Well, it took a long time to realize, but our best guess as to why they were missing from all these works of art is because these animals are ones that they never caught. Yeah, these are animals that they would dream about, right? They were always afar, just running away. They could never hunt or catch them because at this time they were too fast or too strong. Plus, at this time, they didn't have certain weapons or tools available. Yet. More than fair. I would much rather draw a bison than have to tackle one. You know what I mean? Number 3, art. Of course we have to mention art. I'm not saying the Mayans invented art by any means. Each of these ancient civilizations had their own way of expressing the afterlife or life in general. Art was just everywhere. The Mayans specialized in decorating stone landmarks. There's only a handful of woodcut art pieces, but the most popular are these stone pieces from Copan and Quirigua. They're extremely complex as well, obviously. Look at these. Rock climbers couldn't even get their fingers in these grooves. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. Yet somehow people made them. These zoomorphs here are giant rock sculptures created in the shape of animals, which are always fun. And of course, the Mayans are also famous for their wall paintings dating back to 200 BC. One of the most well preserved is at Bonampak. Look at this. This is incredible. We often look at Egyptians and their art, but this is incredible too. Often overlooked. Number 2, flutes. Music has been in the air for quite a long time now, and Neanderthals enjoyed a flute every now and then, it seems. Yeah, they weren't playing We Three Kings or anything like that, but they were making music as early as 50,000 years ago. Incredible, I still can't even whistle, 50,000 years later. The first instrument known to man was most likely our vocal cords, but the second instrument were the flutes of Geisenkloster Cave. They're the oldest musical instruments that have ever been discovered. They were made from bird bone and ivory of a mammoth. Yeah, so if it's any indication how old they are, they made music out of mammoth ivory. Yeah, take that, Skrillex. Finally, number 1, glass. Imagine making glass. Imagine being like, oh yeah, my dad makes glass. I don't know, he's a magician, I guess. Imagine making glass for the first time. You know what I mean? Like, you're a wizard. Even if you made glass now, I would think you're a wizard. Glass blowing shows on Netflix. I'm like, you're all wizards. How do you do this? Glass that was naturally occurring, like obsidian for example, that was around and used during the Stone Age. Man-made glass was first used around 6,000 years ago. Archaeologists are pitting Lebanon, North Syria, ancient Egypt, all as the birthplace of synthetic glass. The first use of man-made glass were beads. Yeah, imagine being the first person to rock beads. Ah, the confidence. A bead door? An ancient bead door? You would be a genius. Mid-2000s BC, guy glazes up some beads. What an icon. Like I said, art comes in many different shapes and sizes.
Number 10 in the countdown is the kayak. Its true name is the hayak, but foreigners didn't know how to pronounce this word, and when they read it, they dubbed the one-manned boat a kayak. The hayak was used for over 2,000 years by the Inuit, with the exception of those in the most northern regions. A little too cold for it there. This small narrow boat was created by the Inuit in the Arctic region of Canada. It's a piece of ingenuity. The cockpit was closed to avoid the passenger from sinking if the craft were to capsize, something that was completely unique at the time. These crafted transportation boats were created with wood or whalebone frames and covered with stitched sealskin or other animal pelts. They were perfect for the transportation of goods, travel, and hunting, allowing Inuit means of exploring Arctic geography and landscape while also accessing natural resources and other communities of Inuits. Oral tradition tells us that this was not only an item of practicality, however, but also one of personal growth and connection to self and community. Today, the kayak is used by many for leisure, sports, tourism, and competition. Number 9 is baby bottles and formulas. The baby bottle has been found in a few northern indigenous clans' histories, Iroquois and Seneca being the prime examples. The baby bottle of the past is drastically different from the plastic and silicone model found in stores today. Water skins were used by ancient Egyptians and global indigenous colonies alike, but the indigenous inventors made some changes so as to use them to accommodate babies. First, they did not use goat skin like the Egyptians, but rather the dried then greased bag-shaped stomachs of their large prey like boars, bears, and buffaloes. Secondly, they learned to attach a bird quill on the end of the intestinal piece to act as a nipple to create the first baby bottle. According to the Iroquois historian Arthur C. Parker, the intestinal tube would be filled with a mix of pounded meats, berries, and nuts. It was cooked until the mixture inside turned into a warm paste or liquid. Another baby food or milk alternative was corn and water mixtures. Number 8 was better when we didn't have to pay rent for them. It's apartments. Indigenous colonies around the world executed the same idea. Many people resided residing in the same building, but in different ways. In Southern America, the Anasazi may have moved south after the warfare decimated their population, but their historic community still stands. The Anasazi were masters of the humble yet expansive identical apartments. Before the arrival of Europeans, Indigenous peoples in Canada had their own building traditions. Differing from nation to nation depending on their purpose and function, the building traditions reflected the important aspects of Indigenous peoples' cultures, societies, geographics, environments, and spiritual beliefs. In eastern woodlands, Iroquois, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and others' characteristic dwelling was the longhouse, a metaphor for life wherein families gathered and ceremonies assembled. It looks as it sounds, long and narrow in structure and meant to house several families related through the female lineage. A village would oftentimes be a group of these longhouses surrounded by pole-based fences. Another example is the wigwams, which was generally housing 1 to 3 families and were used in eastern woodlands and subarctic regions. Wigwams were able to be disassembled and reassembled for those who moved with the season or with the hunting. Imagine that, you hate your neighbor, you can just pack up your whole house, head out.
Number 7. Axes. The Neolithic period, also referred to as the New Stone Age, introduced us to many vital tools that we still use today. Like an axe, for example. Around 10,000 BC, Neanderthals moved from being these small hunter-gatherer type groups to these much larger settlements. In order to do so, you had to clear a lot of land. Humans evolved at this point in history because that's when we went from flaking stones to grinding them down entirely. We put a little more elbow grease in order to clear those trees out, to build a settlement or 2 or 3 or 5. Neolithic axes were found at sites in England and Denmark. This one here was found in great condition, alarmingly great condition. Like, look at this thing. It was uncovered during archaeological surveys for a tunnel project in Denmark. Imagine finding a 5,500-year-old axe in the middle of your shift. And in case you're wondering, the lack of oxygen in the surrounding clay is the reason why the wooden handle was preserved so well. It almost seems like it was placed there as some type of offering. My first thought is that it's for sure belonging to the Odin-Thor family. I don't know. It's placed downwards, you know what I mean? No one touch it.
Scared of heights? Number 6 isn't, it's suspension bridges. That's right, in ancient times, people were constructing bridges. Wanna get stressed? Let's talk about the materials used. In South America, the Inca figured out how to weave certain mountain grasses and other plants into thick ropes that could be used to make bridges. The Incas were the only pre-industrial American culture to invent long-span suspension bridges, said to have rigged 200 plus bridges across gorges and cliffs. In another rugged region, the Himalayans seemed to independently develop suspension systems at pretty much the exact same time, albeit they were different. But the Europeans didn't have the know-how until several centuries later after the Inca Empire fell. Embarrassing. Northwest BC is home to some suspension bridges made of wood systems. The best known is the bridge over the Buckley River at the Haguagat Canyon. The design theory is similar to that of the Inca and Himalayan, the strongest point extending outwards from the edges and then a gangway tied to join the two halves in the center point. The physics of these historic bridges was something European and American engineers copied for our modern bridges in the early 20th century. You can visit the last standing suspension bridge made by the ancient Inca of South America in Peru, Canas province. Dare you to walk across.
Number 5. Rubber. Rubber is a fundamental. I mean, sure, the long-term effects for rubber are questionable in turn. Now we have literal pits full of tires, but where did it all begin? And why? The Maya created art, they looked to the stars and made calendars, but what did they do when they wanted to have a good time? Mayan meals were composed of maize, squash, and beans, with tons of crops. Turns out the Maya were the ones who created elastic, long before Mr. Goodyear over here. They made elastic from latex by mixing it with other plants. They really created bouncy balls, if anything. They took latex from trees and mixed it with vine juice. This was around 1600 BC, and you can't invent rubber balls without creating some.
Number 4 is anesthetic medicines, topicals, oh my. Traditional medicine is part of cultural legacy of indigenous peoples and their purpose for more than 2,500 plant species. Like the Takana and the Leko, who use quinine, cat's claw, and avanta, all plants recognized by modern pharmaceutical industries. First Nations used olefin, hydrocarbons, and methane to make petroleum jelly and used it to hydrate and protect animal and human skin. The Amazonian and Andean indigenous people of South America pioneered the use of a variety of medicinal plants to manage ailments. An example of this is ginger. We currently use it to flavor dishes, but indigenous healers prepared it as a medicinal drink to relieve pain or reduce inflammation. Another remedy for pain and inflammation was black willow bark. Once it gets into the body, salsin produces salicylic acid, the active active ingredient in modern aspirin tablets. That's right, they produced aspirin. And in modern day Virginia, Jimson weed was ground and used as a plaster on external injuries and bruises. It could be injected or ingested as an anesthetic while broken bones were set. There are even treatments for hemorrhoids, suppositories made from dogwood trees, a material still used medicinally today. Oral contraceptives were invented when the Shoshone and Potawatomi used herbs like stone seed and dogbane to prevent pregnancy. I swear I could make an entire video about the medicines and remedies invented by indigenous people, many of which were also the first ways to brush teeth, cleanse breath, heck, even the first sunscreen was invented through indigenous healing practices. It's truly unreal what was accomplished, and I personally recommend sweet fern tea for your next stomach bug or hangover.
Number 3. Blades. Around 80,000 years ago, the first ever 5 o'clock shadow appeared. And it wasn't my family, we don't have those. An upper Paleolithic stone tool tradition came from Neanderthals and also the first modern human. It's a big deal. This method here was to shave up your face so you're not, eating your own mustache for dinner, and it was entirely new to the game. During this process, Neanderthals would often break off these sharp flakes from the core of a large stone and then use those chips as blades. Horrible, just imagining that. The Aurignacian culture, appropriately named after the French village of Aurignac, where Neanderthal remains were found back in 1860, this culture is the first modern human in Europe. Looking back to around 100,000 years ago, we had to use seashells. And when I say seashells to get rid of hair, I don't mean they would, glide across the skin or anything like that. They would use 2 shells, then use them together as tweezers. Yeah, 1 by 1. Seashells, can you imagine? That's horrible. Can you hear that? That's the sound of our ancestors plucking their unibrow. Sounds painful, right? Yes, it was. Sharpened clamshells were later used in the 19th century because we realized that they're flat enough we could probably just swipe off the hair. It saved a lot of time. Still horrible, but we saved a lot of time. We figured it out.
Number 2 is I can't hear you. Thankfully, that was no concern to the indigenous peoples, as when speakers of one language met those of another in trade, council, travels, or conflicts, they communicated in the then universal language of hand talk. It's dated past 30 years old and observed among Florida tribes by the 16th century Spanish colonizers. This is considered one of the oldest languages in North America, without a word ever being spoken. Though universal in North America, hand talk was more prominent amongst the nomadic Plains nations, earning the modern-day title of Plains Indian Sign Language, or PISL. So, if sign language was around for this long, why didn't you know, and why isn't it a worldwide language like English is? 2 reasons. 1. By the late 1800s, tens of thousands of indigenous people still used hand talk, but that changed when the federal government and Catholic Church initiated the erasure of indigenous people and culture. This destroyed the communities and history for decades to come. And 2. In the 1870s and 1880s, fierce opponents of sign language called oralists were led by the apparent Canadian legend Alexander Graham Bell on an ableist mission to ban sign language and force hearing impaired people to communicate by lip reading or learning to speak, because it was apparently more convenient for everyone else. He rightfully failed, as ASL and indigenous hand talk are still recognized and used to date. He did introduce some new techniques some hearing impaired people just prefer more. McKay Cody is the first deaf researcher to specialize in North American hand talk, and today helps work with indigenous colonies and tribes to help preserve the original sign language. She's also pushing for PISL to be rightfully incorporated into mainstream education of ASL. At number 1 in the countdown, no, it wasn't the Greeks and it wasn't the Romans. How indigenous democracy made the colonial world. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy of what is now upstate New York developed a democracy made up of 6 nations, with each tribe taking care of its own governance. Consisting of 117 rules recorded on strings of wampum beads, the Great Law of Peace, an oral constitution, was designed to help the Haudenosaunee live in harmony. Dating to as early as perhaps 1142, this charter is based on community unity, liberty, and equity. It even provides for the separation of powers and outlines impeachment procedures. Should any major issue arise in a tribe that was of interest to all tribes, the 6 would convene in a middle point and to make any decisions together. Beside vesting the community with the power to choose its leaders, a right which at the time may have been unique in the world, it was even described that the ideal character of those leaders was a servant to their people rather than an overlord. You were to lead with empathy, honesty, bravery. The United States of America traces its political roots to the Declaration of Independence in 1776, but by then democracy was old news in the so-called New World. During the American Revolution, thousands of indigenous already lived under a system of governance. So, as the founding founding fathers began crafting a more perfect union from scratch, they followed the example of the Six Nations. This is documented in letters written by George Bush, but also acknowledged hundreds of years later in 1988 by American Congress, who said the confederation of the original 13 colonies into one republic was influenced by the political systems developed by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, as were many of the democratic principles which were incorporated into the Constitution itself, a constitution that the indigenous peoples would be left out of.
Welcome back to Bumblebee. Here are the top 10 Mayan civilization inventions we still can't explain. Kicking off the list at number 10, astronomy. You ever want to date somebody, but they're a Libra and you're a Gemini? Ugh, ain't that the worst? Look, dating apps even have this now as a feature. You can write down what your symbol is, like, hi, I'm Kyle, I'm a Leo, and I love waking up early. Those are real bios for real people, and we have the Mayans to thank for all of this. The Maya studied the stars. They were the pioneers of our calendar, which I'll explain a little bit later on, but they also created lunar months. They figured that 81 lunar months added up to 2,392 days, meaning that one lunar month is 29.53 days, incredibly close to our modern moon month, which is crazy. They nailed it that long ago. They also studied Jupiter, Mars, and Mercury. They studied where each planet travels to and when. If you're a Libra, like me, smash that thumbs up. I'm a late Libra too. We're just trouble. We're the worst of the worst. Number 9, the Mayan calendar. It's 2022, which means the world thankfully did not end in 2012, but the Mayan calendar predicted that on December 21st, 2012, apparently it would be this massive doomsday. No meteors hit, that was all false, that wasn't a real thing. Thanos didn't snap any of us away, nothing like that happened. But that day did mark the end of their 5,125 year-long calendar. Yeah, and you thought you were a planner. Okay. The Mayan calendar is extremely accurate. Their calendar is 10,000ths of a day more exact than the calendar that the world uses today. They're that precise. We have leap years and stuff just to try and correct it. They used 20-day months and had 2 calendar years. They had a 260-day sacred round and then a 365-day year. Every 52 years, these 2 calendars would coincide with one another, and this was referred to as a bundle. Imagine if we still had this now, that'd be so confusing. Like 10, 9, 8, what are we saying? 7. Number 8, chocolate. When I visited the UK, the first thing I noticed was how much better your chocolate was. So good. I'm not sure what y'all are doing over there. Maybe it's just made with love. Who knows? But I'm a huge chocolate guy, and the UK nails it. Yeah, wash it down with some iron brew. Buddy, what a day. What a great day. The Mayans as well, turns out they loved chocolate. The Olmecs of Mesoamerica figured out how to consume chocolate, but the Mayans made it beautiful. They added some spice to it, literally. The Mayans would mix chocolate with water, chili peppers, and honey. They would make a spicy drink. Are you into this idea? Is this making your lips happy right now? Spicy chocolate drinks? My tummy can barely handle a pumpkin spice latte, let alone a Mayan milkshake. No thank you.
Number 7, let's check out the raised bed agriculture. One of the most famous examples in the Inca dynasty, historians and archaeologists were mind blown to discover the Incas understood water irrigation, underwatering, floating farms and gardens, and raised bed agriculture. The indigenous of South and Central America invented the technique of enriching soil and piling it to build raised garden plots called chinampas on swampy land and in lakes, a forerunner model now used for modern vegetable farming. Well, this practice spread from Mesoamerica to other indigenous colonies of South and Central America and then further. The Three Sisters, which are corn, beans, and squash's method of growing, showed up along the East Coast and Great Lakes of Canada. The raised beds allowed for control over the growing environment, something that wild planting could not. But unlike that style of row agriculture, the 3 plants were allowed to grow together, creating a microenvironment for ripe growth. The sisters were only to be segregated by blocks and mounds to keep them free from weeds.
Number 6, glyphs. Glyphs at number 6. 6 glyphs. One of the most advanced forms of writing when it comes to all these ancient Americans, the Maya were the most ahead of their time. They invented the glyph, which are these symbols that represent a word or a sound. Like anything else in this civilization, it's beautiful to look at, of course. The Maya used around 700 different glyphs. They're detailed, they're beautiful. A good amount we're able to translate today, but there's still a mysterious chunk that we're trying to figure out. The earliest glyphs engravings go back to the 3rd century BC, meaning that the Maya are the pioneers of writing in Mesoamerica. There are only a few civilizations where writing naturally occurred: the Mayans, ancient Chinese, and the ancient Mesopotamians. Number 5, medicine. You can only imagine the various injuries Neanderthals would have, right? Hunting down a mammoth or a bison 3 times the size of you, yeah, odds are you're gonna get a bruise or 2. More than fair. So what did Neanderthals do at this point? Is that what the pile of bones is for? I'm starting to connect this. That makes more sense. God, that's dark. How did Neanderthals live for so long without a pharmacy, right? All that yelling, no halls? Are you kidding? My throat hurts doing this list already. Neanderthal medical skills are pretty similar to what our ancestors did. Herbal remedies, that's it, right? It changes your life. They manage fevers, but when the pain got too bad, chewing on a specific tree may have helped tolerate all that pain. Yeah, 4,000 years before penicillin, Neanderthals were chewing on aspirin. Number 4. Ball games. Yeah, imagine inventing a bouncy ball. You can now create any game you want. Any rules. You'll never lose again. How great is that? The Maya have pretty impressive ball courts. These games were all but fun, honestly. These were religious events. These games would last around 20 days on average, so I hope you warmed up that arm because you're going to be here for a while. The pressure was always on, also from the overlords, as these courts were built at the bottom of a sanctuary. Yeah, hey, no pressure, but your ex is here with Zeus. Break a leg. The go-to game was called pocket talk or hodgepodge, and you had to throw a heavy elastic ball through a hoop. Instead of fist bumping at the end of the day saying good game, good game, good game, the losing side would either 1, not survive, dark, or they would have to give over all of their belongings, which also sucks. Yeah, a 20-day game, and then you'd lose all your stuff. That's horrible. What a horrible month.
Rubber is number 3, and no, not the contraceptive. Many don't know that natural latex is derived from plants and trees. Many also don't know that the Aztecs, Olmec, and Maya of the Mesoamerica are known to have made rubber using this natural latex. It would be harvested from rubber trees and mixed with the juice of morning glory vines. These two plants ironically would grow very close to each other, so it's believed that's how ancient civilizations stumbled across the vine's fluid containing a chemical that solidified latex so it wouldn't be brittle anymore. Depending on your latex to vine juice ratio, your rubber could differ. Some came out more bouncy, like a rubber ball used in the famous Mesoamerican ball games. Other combinations created durable leather, which was likely used for homes as well as for sandals, which were described by Spanish conquistadors that have never been found by archaeologists. When you look into Aztec civilization, it's not a surprise that they were making advanced rubber. They truly had the spirit of scientific inquiry.
Number 2. Laws. The Maya made their own ball games, they made their own rules, they made chocolate their own way, but they also created law and order. In a time where food and shelter was sparse, you would think it would be a lot like the Dark Ages, just a bloody mess, you know, full of thieves and bodies and bad stuff everywhere. Well, when you're the first civilization to create the death penalty, everybody is pretty well behaved afterwards. More than fair. Yeah, fair. Taking the life of others was uncommon because of these harsh laws. I mean, you remember how those ball games would end, right? Yeah, imagine crimes. If you were to take the life of another, say you lost a ball game, all your goods are now gone, you react in a horrible way, well, who comes knocking at your door asking questions? Who says you're now a suspect? Sherlock Holmes? No. Say you live with somebody and they commit a crime. Well, not only are they now gone after they get caught, but the victim also gets your land. They get all your goods, cattle, your home, everything. So whoever lives with you as well, you better pack your rubber balls. You're out of here. You don't live here anymore thanks to Good Game Gordo over here. I'm glad certain things stuck around, like the law and order part, but imagine being evicted because your roommate stole some beans. God damn it, Craig. Don't do that. And finally, number 1, the underworld. Also referred to as the place of fright. Okay, save the best for last, we love it. Xibalba comes from Mayan mythology. Overseen, of course, by the Mayan death gods, Xibalba came to be in the 16th century Verapaz. The entrance to such a wonderful place was in the cave of Guatemala. So, splunkers beware if you're putting that on your agenda, maybe avoid this one. Caves in Belize are actually known as the entrance to Xibalba, these water-filled caves again, and they span as far as 300 feet. That's a massive, evil front door you want to avoid right there. But you can't just grab a snorkel and frog kick your way to the underworld. It's not that easy. According to ancient Maya scripture, the Popol Vuh, this path once filled with dark obstacles, and when I say dark obstacles, I mean dark. I'm talking a river filled with scorpions and blood, combined with houses littered with bats and pure darkness. It's not easy to get through. It's like those haunted houses in Niagara Falls. It's really scary. This is why you don't cheat in Mayan ball games. You end up here. Do you want to be here? No. In fact, if you cheat in Monopoly, I believe you also end up here. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Stacy. Don't cheat. Kicking off the list at number 10, burials. This list is full of interesting objects that Neanderthals created, like tools or weapons, that kind of stuff. But the idea of burying your loved one after they've passed on, well, that had to start somewhere, didn't it? Ancient Egyptians arguably did it the best. The rich were buried with their treasure and goods because they believed that death on our world was just the start. There was another life afterwards, and they would take their treasure and good stuff with them. Bye. Not leaving anything for you, I'm taking all this with me. Neanderthals didn't figure out how to build tombs yet or how to rule for decades. Studies done in Western Europe suggest that Neanderthals would sometimes bury their dead and leave flowers. Flowers or a grave marker of some sort. Pollen was found in northern Iraq's Shandir caves. Shandir cave is a staple when it comes to Neanderthal history, and the fact that flowers were found in the middle of a cave system, some humans and emotions are definitely at play here. This was symbolic thinking. The weather didn't make it easy to collect flowers as well. Loved ones passing during an ice age? Yeah, I'll never complain about an outdoor funeral again. Number 9. Glass. Imagine making glass for the first time. You would have thought you were a wizard for sure. I watch glass blowing shows now and it looks like wizardry. Wizardry in 4K. Glass blowing is nuts. They're just like, and it's just like a vase all of a sudden. You're like, how did he do that? That's so hot. Glass that was naturally occurring, like obsidian for example, that was around and used during the Stone Age. Man-made glass was first used around 6,000 years ago. Man-made glass, yeah, let's talk about it. Archaeologists are pinning Lebanon, North Syria, and ancient Egypt as the birthplace of synthetic glass. The first use of man-made glass were beads, believe it or not. Imagine being the first person to rock beads. The confidence. Mid-2000 BC, guy decides to glaze up some beads. What an icon. Now we get to do this. The beads, it's a cool door. Number 8, sharpened stones. Some of the oldest tools in history could be laying in front of you and you would have zero idea. You have no clue. Coming from the shores of Lake Turkana in Kenya, these stone tools date back to around 3 million years ago. Yeah, these are predating the tools before that I mentioned by like 700,000 years. They seem to predate humans and the Homo genus as well, so that's interesting, that's kind of concerning. The volcanic ash and minerals around these sharpened stones date back that far, millions of years old. Stones in history can get a little dirty, to say the least. Not all these ideas that involve stones or sharpened stones are the best. French anthropologist Philippe Charlier shared toilet hygiene history in the British Medical Journal. Perhaps one of the most intriguing parts explains how these flat terracotta discs were found in ancient Greek sites and they had residue on them. They had a certain residue on these sharp rocks. They used to with these stones, yeah. They also discovered a Greek cup which said 3 stones are enough to wipe one's arse. 3? I don't know, that's at least 5, my friend. Greeks would use stones to wipe. Never take the go for granted ever again.
In our number 7 spot today, we have Mithridate. Mithridate was named after King Mithridate VI, who was the king of Pontus. It is said that he was so terribly afraid of being poisoned that he, over the course of 7 years, adapted his body to different poisons. It is also said that after mixing 54 ingredients together, he was able to create Mithridate, which is said to have been a universal antidote to all poisons. The exact formula has of course been lost to time, but historians have said that it was believed the antidote contained opium, chopped vipers, and small amounts of the poisons and their antidotes. The antidote was originally created around 100 BC and it was actually used by many people for centuries, and even apparently as recently as the 19th century. It is unclear how the recipe entirely disappeared, but despite some best efforts, no one has really been able to recreate it since the last known use.
Number 6, spears and arrows. Perhaps one of the most vital inventions, one we for sure still use today, always, of course. Arrows and spears were a necessity when it came to hunting, and for people in the Stone Age, all they needed really was wood. They would carve a leaf shape at the end or a triangle at the tip, and then they were mainly used by riders or barefoot hunters. But when it came to hunting, you didn't want to get too close to your prey, or else the wrong team could be claiming victory and eat the other for lunch. You get what I'm saying? So their solution was to huck these spears instead, or make really tiny ones that you can throw. Or shoot. The oldest bows in history are from 9000 BC. They're the home guard bows. They're found in Northern Europe all the way back from the Mesolithic period. The oldest spears, however, they come from Germany around 400,000 years ago, and they're actually the oldest wooden artifacts ever in history. Imagine being the first person to make a spear. Forget iPhones, a spear? That's a big deal.
Number 5 is the first syringe. Hello to our pre-Columbian friends again. You guys were killing it in the Invention game. Indigenous of South America were known to have fashioned a syringe using animal remains. Like with the baby bottle, a sac-like organ was used to hold the liquid. In this case, the choice was smaller animal bladders. Next, a hollowed bird bone with a sharpened tip was attached and used as a needle. How on earth did indigenous peoples got called primitive is beyond me. The ability to even recognize medicines, make them injectable, and figure out the knowledge of the body in prehistoric times enough to know what would happen should it be injected and where, frankly it's remarkable. In fact, the syringe didn't show up in European medicine until the 1850s, when Scottish physician Alexander Wood thought maybe using needles to inject more could relieve pain. Right. And what medicine were the indigenous colonies using in these syringes?
Number 4, paintings. Yeah, why not? Let's include art into this mix. Who was the first person to create art? The Lascaux Caves have been dubbed the Prehistoric Sistine Chapel. These cave paintings are from 17,000 years ago and they're beautiful. But if you're thinking about sneaking down there to write Jordan was here, well, you better think again. The cave was opened originally in 1948, but due to carbon dioxide levels and sweat from visitors and just people breathing and being around, it was closed in 1963. You can't be breathing on our prehistoric paintings. Get your morning dad breath out of here, sir. We don't want that. Look how beautiful it is. It's really nice. Learning about our history is challenging, but it's slowly fading away. We're breathing on it all day long. But these caves in France are not home to the oldest paintings in the world, believe it or not. Altamira Cave in Spain houses cave paintings from 35,000 years ago. The paintings were in such great condition that at first scientists doubted that they were the real deal from that long ago. But in 1902 they were marked as the real deal. These ochre and charcoal images are the most well preserved on the planet. Meanwhile, I'm over here still drawing the sun in the corner of my page.
In our number 3 spot today, we have Nepenthe. If you're a person who's ever had to be subjected to the process that is antidepressant medication, this one might just frustrate you a bit. The ancient Greeks and Romans discovered a lot of things, some of which we use now, and some that seem to have been lost but could have potentially proved to be exceptionally useful to us, and that is exactly what Nepenthe is. Ancient Greeks were known to treat the bereaved with this medicine that seems to have been some sort of a primitive antidepressant. It is said that Nepenthe was known for its ability to chase sorrow away and also to cause forgetfulness. There are many references to this medicinal plant, but at this point we are completely unsure of which modern plant aligns with these ancient descriptions, or if the plant even exists at all anymore.
Number 2. The wheel. One of the greatest inventions of all time, and now all we want is hover cars. How disrespectful, we just got this thing. The wheel! The idea of the wheel is unlike any other. See, most inventors are inspired by nature. Planes, submarines, bullet trains, all has something to do with nature, bird beaks, flying, underwater, all that crap. Nothing in nature resembles a wheel at all. The closest thing really are tumbleweeds and dung beetles. My favorite thing to mention on this channel. The poop rollers. Potter wheels were found from Mesopotamia around 5,500 years ago. Now it's hard to pinpoint who used the wheel first and where, I mean, given the fact that it was that long ago, but the front runners so far, aside from Mesopotamia, are the Tripoli people of modern Ukraine, because the word wheel literally is derived from their language, but the wheelbarrow may have appeared in ancient Greece around 600 BCE. They say you can't reinvent the wheel, but I feel like you can. At least this early in time, I feel like we did. Number 1, fire. Fire. Of course. I mean, next to the wheel, this one was, it's pretty important, I'd say. When was fire first used in history? Well, a study done in 2011 was published in the Proceedings of National Academy of Science, and it showed that Neanderthals were firebenders. Not really, no. They were just, after carefully examining over 140 fireplace sites in Europe, the University of Colorado Boulder found some stone artifacts and charcoal dating back to 400,000 years ago. Now, of course, these fireplaces were used to cook meals, but at the same time, tools were created during this process. Melting things and moving them around, kind of like glass blowing, heat makes things come to life. Neanderthals would use something called pitch. Pitch was made by burning the bark of birch trees. It allowed them to attach stones to wooden shafts, which is a pretty big deal when it came to hammers and tools. Inventing glue is one thing, but doing it while you're working the barbecue? Whose dad was that? That's impressive. That's so impressive. Guys making tools while making lunch.
Number 10. Steel cage match, brother. Okay, so it's the early 1900s and you're living in a rapidly growing city. Towers are popping up everywhere, and that means that there's less space for you and your baby to play in. Only if there was a way my baby could get fresh air and sunshine. Meet the baby cage. Yeah, a small metal cage with a tiny mattress for your baby. The said metal cage is suspended on your windowsill, making the baby suspend multiple stories above ground level. This is just a great idea. The idea behind this terrible idea was that the babies need fresh air and sunshine. Providing them with such was thought to improve their immune system and make them healthier. Besides the fact that the only thing separating your baby from becoming the worst rainfall event of the month was a thin metal cage. This is a prime example of why every product should be thoroughly tested and thought about before selling. Eventually, these did fall out of fashion, but in reality this wasn't that long ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. Number 9. Nuclear time. A lot happened in the 1900s. I mean, a lot. Couple wars here and there, the TV, the car. It was a busy century. A century full of discovery and invention. One such unusual invention was the radium dial, watches and clocks that were painted with luminescent paint, making the numbers and dials glow in the dark. Trouble with this new invention was the paint being used wasn't exactly safe, as it was made from radium. For the Breaking Bad nerds at home, radium is a highly radioactive element, even more so than the legendary uranium. So when a factory of women eager to get to work were told they were going to be painting watches with radioactive paint, do you think anyone asked for PPE? Truth be told, not everything was known about radium as it was only recently discovered, but what's so unusual is what factories told these women how to paint the watches. In order to give the brushes a fine tip, the women were instructed to use their lips to keep the brushes in perfect order, not knowing that day after day they were ingesting a very radioactive element. And in some sense of dark comedy, they sometimes had fun and painted their nails and on each other. I mean, it glowed in the dark, it was glow in the dark paint, it was new, it was cool. Over 50 women would become very sick from painting, and 12 sadly lost their lives. Number 8. I'm ready for my close-up. Ladies, this one's for you. In this day and age with social media, loving your self-image can be tough. There's tons of things that makeup companies and media do to make you want to be the people they want you to be. If you buy said product, of course. Well, I'm here to tell you that you don't need all that. You're gorgeous just the way you are, and lately, honey, you've been slaying it. However, this marketing manipulation isn't new, and in the past, most certainly wasn't very subtle. Introducing the Beauty Micrometer, the latest from How to Horrify People Daily. It was actually invented by the famed beautician Max Factor Sr. Hell of a name. This steel cagey device was placed over a poor woman's head, to then mathematically calculate the flaws that would be adjusted using makeup products. Obviously, these are no longer around, and for good reason. I don't even have a joke for that one, that's just weird.
Number 7. The Pit of Bones. The Pit of Bones. Classic, great name. Located in northern Spain. Yeah, first of all, what a horrible, scary name that is. Imagine pitching this to the wife for a family trip. Yeah, we're going to the Pit of Bones. Grab your sandals, it's gonna be great. Since 1976, well over 6,000 human fossils have been collected from the Pit of Bones. They found around 28 individual Neanderthals in total, so maybe the Pit of Bones is actually a great name after all. Kinda nails it, I guess. The skeletons date back to around 430,000 years ago. Now, in terms of facial features, these are for sure Neanderthals. We can confirm them. Neanderthal lineage confirmed. Very old. That's so old. I can't even imagine.
Number 6. Battleship Woodchip. This is one of my favorites. Okay, hear me out for this one. Back in the 1940s, there was a really super not very fun expensive war happening. Germany, Japan, and Italy needed to go into the timeout corner. But after a while of people trying to put each other in the timeout corner, things were getting super expensive. World War II was fought on all fronts, land, sea, and air. The sea being a key part of the war victory in the beginning of the war. Literally tons of war goods and ships were being sunk by German U-boats every day across the Atlantic. So, in order to cut costs, what if the ships were built out of something cheaper, but just as tough as steel? Concrete, right? Nope, I bet you weren't thinking ice. Or more specifically, sawdust and ice mixed to form pykrete. Testing with pykrete had gone so well that in a super secret general meeting, pykrete was presented, shot at in the meeting, ricocheting a bullet causing another general a flesh wound. Having its defense capabilities proven in the war room, Operation Habakkuk was greenlit, and the Allies were planning on constructing an aircraft carrier made out of ice and sawdust to help thwart the German U-boats. However, this was scrapped, as a boat made of sawdust and ice would really not be much help against a German U-boat. Plus, where do you sleep? Can you cook on there? Way more questions than answers.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the telharmonium. The telharmonium is regarded as one of the world's first electronic instruments. This instrument was kind of like an organ, but it used wheels to create different synthetic tones. From here, the tones would be transmitted over telephone wires with the intention of getting the music broadcast so that people could listen in. Considering the fact that this instrument was created in 1897, that's a pretty cool invention for the time, so the fact that it once existed really is super cool. Unfortunately, however, the idea was taking too much energy from the grid, which led to it being just totally scrapped. Instead of finding out another way to use this instrument or just waiting for technology to advance to a point where this would be able to be used, they just destroyed it. Now, in 2020, not only does the telharmonium not exist, but there aren't even any recordings of it, so it seems as though this might be one thing that's just lost forever.
Number 4. Deep breath, my equine friend. World War I was the war to end all wars, except for the 10 major wars that came after it. Noted for being the bloodiest and most destructive conflict at the time, it gave humanity a bunch of cool and exciting inventions, so long as they were not being used on you. One of the worst things to come out of the First World War was the extensive use of trench warfare and chemical weapons, or more specifically chlorine gas. Trench warfare was brutal, not only in its barbaric over-the-top charges into machine gun fire, but also in its living. Trenches had terrible living conditions, and were difficult to take from the enemy. Crossing no man's land was no joke. So, to eliminate the pesky enemies entrenched in their trenches, the very cruel chlorine gas was used, causing nausea, violent coughing, chest pain, and corneal burns. Just about everything you'd find on the back of normal medication, right? Gas masks helped when they were available, but unfortunately they were not the only living creatures on the battlefield. This is where our invention comes in. The very depressing invention of the horse gas mask. The idea is the same. Horses need protection too, and since World War I was still a war powered by horses, it was more common than you might think. And a lot of our equine friends perished alongside us.
Number 3. More art. Okay, here's where we're at with Neanderthals and art. First of all, we don't have an actual representational version of their art, but we do have symbolism, which is, some would argue, the same thing. That's pretty close. And just as fascinating, really. Especially when they look like this, when they look like a masterpiece in a cave. These are eagle talons. They're about 130,000 years old, and they're found at the Krapina Neanderthal site in Croatia. And researchers believe that they were part of a jewelry set, like earrings or a part of a necklace, something like that. I couldn't even make this now with a YouTube tutorial, let alone 130,000 years ago. This is mind-blowing.
Number 2. Chef's kiss. Okay, it's 1958. Times are good. Cars have cool fins on them. Elvis is on the radio, and most of my post-traumatic stress disorder has cleared up since the war was over. It's all great. Ah, yes, life is good. I can't wait to enjoy some modern cuisine. Well, let's see what's on the menu. I'll have to start with the frozen cheese salad. I'll have ham with banana hollandaise. And for dessert, I'll have the lime jello tuna pie. If that doesn't sound appetizing, I don't know what does. For some reason, halfway through the century, people just lost their taste buds. They were coming up with all kinds of disgusting foods. A lot of them are in low form for some strange reason. I think the grossest item that you can come across is a little invention called hongar. Sounds like somebody from Skyrim, but nay good sir. Hongar is a mixture of honey and apple cider vinegar. It was thought to provide great health benefits. The only thing that would give me is a spot in front of the toilet refunding my breakfast. Ugh. Number 1. Krümellauf. Germany was having a really hard time in World War II. United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, France, and Russia too were all coming to give the mustache man a piece of their mind. Heavily outnumbered, it was time for a miracle. Time to see what top German scientists had up their sleeve. We have a rifle that can shoot around the corners. Isn't it wunderbar? Yeah, this thing is real. A curved barrel called a Krümellauf, used for shooting around tight spaces like corners and out of tank hatches. During the waning years of the war, Germany was coming up with all kinds of crazy inventions to turn the tide. But a rifle that can shoot around corners probably isn't the answer. As mentioned above, the world was coming, and they needed a lot more than a fancy pants rifle to stop the Allies. History tells us that this invention did not work, as Mustache Man is no more.